Hey nerdy knitters, we all have our favorite cast on techniques, the go-to that we use for most of our projects, but sometimes a project requires something a little more special. That's when I love to use an invisible cast on, where you don't get that hard cast on line. It just rolls right around and looks really neat and finished and takes your knitting from homemade to handmade. Before we look at my favorite invisible cast on technique, I just want to say, hey, I'm Tanya here at Nerdy Knitting. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a knitwear designer, and my goal is to help you become a more confident, adventurous knitter. Now, a lot of different types of cast-ons can be called invisible cast-ons. It's sort of a category of cast-ons. There's provisional cast-ons, tubular cast-on, and when you cast on in pattern, that's also an invisible cast-on, and that's what we're going to look at today. The other types, the provisional and the tubular, they are perfect and they worked well in a lot of situations, but sometimes they're a little bit finicky and you want something a little simpler. That's when I like to use an alternate cable cast on. Now you'll need a slip knot to start this cast on. I like to pinch the yarn between my thumb and first finger, wrap the yarn around my first two fingers, pinch the yarn again, wrap it one more time, but this second time it has to be to the left of that first wrap. Just like that, to the left. Bring it under and pinch it again. Now you're going to use your needle to slide right between the two, catch that second strand and pull it right through the first, and you have a slip knot. So there's one way to do it. Whatever way you like to put a slip knot on your needle, do that. Now we have one setup stitch. We're going to do what's called a knit cast on, where you insert as if you're going to knit. Wrap the yarn, make sure you're not grabbing the tail, like you're going to knit a stitch. Pull it through, and then holding your needles parallel, place that new stitch on the needle. That's just a setup. Now we're not going to do that again. We have two stitches on our needle. Now when we start our pattern, this last stitch is going to be a purl, and this first stitch here will be a knit. So our next stitch has to be a purl. Okay, to form a new stitch using the cable cast on, you insert between these two stitches. Right there. That's for a knit stitch. We want to do a purl stitch. So we're going to come from behind, just as you're going to purl, but you're between the two stitches, just like that. So you insert and you're going to wrap and pull that stitch through just like a purl stitch. Pull it through, and then holding your needles parallel, put it on the needle. Now that's our next purl stitch. So now we have to make a knit stitch. You can pull it tight, not too tight, because you have to get your needle in between those stitches. So this time we repeat that between the two stitches from the front this time, because we want to make a knit stitch. Wrap your yarn like you're going to knit. Keep that tail out of the way. Pull it through just like a knit stitch between two stitches. Hold your needles parallel and put that on your needle. And then we just continue alternating that. We want a purl stitch next, so we come from behind, being careful not to go into a stitch. You want to go between those stitches. Bring that yarn to the front and purl that stitch. Make a purl, pull it through, place it on the needle. And then we do a knit stitch between the two stitches, wrap the yarn, pull it through, place it on the needle. And you're going to continue doing that for as many stitches as you need. But what if you had to set your work down and you came back to it and you can't remember if you've put a purl stitch on there last or a knit stitch on there last? There's a few things you can do. It looks a little odd right now, but to tell the difference between the two, these prominent stitches in the front, right there and right there, and that one, those are your knit stitches. And these ones that are sort of recessed in behind those prominent stitches, those are purl stitches. But it's a little harder to tell over here on the end, but I'm going to tug on that yarn, and it's coming out of this very first stitch right here. That's my clue that that's a knit stitch. So my next one's going to be a purl. Now, if the last stitch you worked is a purl stitch, look at the placement of the yarn. It's 2 stitches away from the end. So that one tells me that it's a purl stitch that I worked last. So my next stitch is going to be a knit stitch. Now, after you finished casting on all of your stitches, the last stitch you cast on should be a knit stitch. Then you're ready to start your pattern. Knit 1, purl 1 across the row, or the round if you're knitting in the round. I finished the first row, and you can see there is our invisible alternate cable cast on. Doesn't look like much right now, but I promise it does look better on a finished object. And if you're using a knit 1, purl 1 pattern, you can use it whether you're knitting flat or in the round. Just cast on just like we demonstrated here. When you start your first row, you're going to knit 1 and purl 1, and you'll set your pattern. Now, when would you want to use this type of cast on, this alternate cable cast on for that invisible edge? Wherever you want a neatly finished edge without that hard cast on line. Now, if you want to see this cast on in action, check out this video right here where I demonstrate how to knit a hat with any yarn.